All right, welcome everyone. This is Eric and Michelle, and we have a special guest today for our JumpSearch Talent Show podcast. And her name is Sce Pike. She's coming out of Portland, Oregon, and we've invited her. Let me turn this off. We've invited her today to talk a little bit about her experience and her journey as an entrepreneur, as an investor, as a 1.5 gen to the US, and as a mom. And so we hope to learn a little bit about her journey. And hopefully there's a lot that we can take away as we learn from her experiences, her ups and downs, her regrets, and her lessons that we can apply to our own lives today. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Sce. And before we jump into that, I do want to say that we are streaming live on LinkedIn. So if you have questions out there, feel free to drop them in. We may or may not be able to get to them. And we are recording live, and we are streaming live, and we will be putting the recording on Spotify as well. So welcome, Sce. Great to have you here.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Michelle. Really happy to be here.
Yeah, welcome.
So, before we do podcasts like this, we always do a bunch of homework, and we try to get to know our guests a little bit. Obviously, we had a chance to get to know you a little bit on a preparatory call and a few email exchanges, but I think there's still so much that we're hoping to get to know about you. We do a little bit of snooping around on the internet, and we find videos, and we try to get a little glimpse into who our guests are. And I gotta say, when we were snooping around on the internet, really impressed with your background, just really impressed with your journey, at least what we've been able to glimpse in our snooping around. You studied anthropology and electronic arts, and you went into user experience, working for Palm, and and I'm not going to try to, tell your story, but you saw these opportunities that you took advantage of, and you were looking out to where the puck was going, and you were skating there. And so I thought it was just amazing, and so excited to hear more about your story here, obviously, as we dive in. So anyway, without further ado, would love to just, if you could make a brief intro, we could just start jumping into some of the topics that we had discussed previously.
Sure. Sce Pike. Again, really, flattered to be invited and happy to be here. My quick background is I'll just give a little bit of what I did most recently and then kind of jump to my past. But most recently, I started IoT as a service company called IOTAS, sold that to ADT, the security firm, who's now going to Smart Home as well. And then prior to that, I had another company called Citizen, which I sold to Ernst & Young, and that was doing strategy, development, and design work for various major Fortune 100 companies. And so, but my journey really begins probably around entrepreneurship and leadership as really a 1.5 generation child, of immigrant parents. And I think about this and I think, why am I so comfortable in doing startups and being an entrepreneur? And when I think about what my parents did, which was to leave a country, South Korea, and move here in the 80s when, my dad didn't speak the language. They had two young kids, and they had no fear about going to another country. And the first thing that they did when they got here, and this is, I think, partially why they moved, is because they love nature. They put us into a tiny Pinto with a bunch of sleeping bags and a tent, and we drove around for a month visiting all the national parks. Right, that was the first thing we did, and so I thought U.S. was the best place in the world. It was just amazing, beautiful mountains, buffaloes everywhere, And then we got to LA, and it's like smog and concretes and parking lots, But I think that really informed kind of watching my parents go through that journey of uprooting their life, moving away from their friends and family, coming to a new country. Like, there's nothing to fear, like nothing can stop you, like nothing should worry you about change. And I think that allowed me to learn to pivot really quickly. Like, nothing became fearful in some ways, and really got that from my parents and their kind of journey.
Say, how old were you when you came to the U.S.?
I was 6. So it was 6. A very easy age because I learned to read in Korea moved here, and I think I learned to read and write and speak like in a matter of 6 months, because once you have that kind of background of how to learn, you get that really quickly once you move. So yeah, it was a good age to move.
Have you ever had the conversation with them about, you know, why did you leave, and
Oh yeah,
what?
many times, many
So what
times.
was it? Yeah, what was it? Because
And I'm
I tried.
skeptical about their answer. Their answer is like, "Oh, because we wanted a better life for you." I'm like, okay. Really?
They were that forward thinking, huh?
Yeah. They're like, "We wanted you to have a better life." I'm like, I guess I sort of buy that, but I don't know. I think they wanted to move, like they wanted to see the world, kind of thing. They were very much travelers, adopters of early technology. They had the big ass cell phone brick, like any new technology they would adopt. So I think they just had the bug to move and try new things.
Yeah, that's amazing. So both Michelle and I were born here in the United States, but our parents were immigrants, and they came here, when they were younger. I mean, like in their teens and 20s. And when I think about what it would take for me as an adult to leave what I'm comfortable with, the
Hmm.
country, the culture that I'm accustomed to go to another country to pursue other opportunities, it would take some serious, like, it would take some guts, right? It would take
Yeah.
some resolve to leave something that you're familiar with behind
Hmm.
in pursuit of something greater. And especially when you think about just the risk there. I mean, when I ask my parents the same thing, they say, it's funny enough, they say the same thing because we wanted better opportunities. So maybe that was sort of an overarching thing, is that in the US, the US is where you went at the time for better opportunities. Um,
I,
but
I wanted to ask, say, and your parents sound pretty cool. I mean, if they're camping out for a month in the national parks, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Did they have anything lined up, or did they know anybody here when they
They knew
moved?
people here. Yeah. Actually, my grandfather had moved a year prior, right? And he was actually treasurer of South Korea, for a year, and there was a coup. And I thought that was the real reason why we moved, not just a better opportunity. But I don't know. I don't know if that they needed to move, like my parents needed to move. I think my grandfather might have needed to move. But it was an interesting time. But yeah, no. So we did have some like family network here, but it was still not like extensive, not like their entire community, right? So
Yeah. So, I mean, uprooting and just having to leave all your family and friends, most of them, it
yeah,
sounds like it was a big deal. But they were early adopters for a lot of things. And so I can see them taking risks, and in some ways kind of embodying that, which is great.
yeah. And I think this is like if you think about job hunting and job searching and moving from company to company. The reason why I have so much experience was because in some ways I was not afraid to move, right? Because I was at Palm and then I got recruited by Qualcomm. And I know my boss was so pissed at me when I didn't even give him the opportunity to counter that. But it was moving from the Bay Area to San Diego to join Qualcomm, and I looked forward to that opportunity. I know for a lot of people, like hunting for a new job or switching careers or switching a job or starting something new on their own is terrifying. For me, I love it. I love the excitement of like job hunting. I find it very like relaxing actually, to like go and see what else is out there too. Like what, not necessarily that the grass is greener, but just what are kind of the new, job skill sets that I need to keep up with, kind of thing, right? And I think my husband, on the other hand, hates it. It is the most terrifying thing to him to be looking at anything new, right? And I think I just have that like habit instilled in me, or genetically instilled in me, of like, let's see what else is going on in the world. So yeah.
That's why you're an entrepreneur.
so were your parents entrepreneurial, or were they entrepreneurs, or how did they make their way
Yeah.
when they came here to the US?
Well, my mom was very much an entrepreneur herself. She started a daycare, which was small because my older brother, needed to go to school. And then she grew it to be a huge business in Korea. And then in the 80s, early 80s, sold it for 100,000 US or so, and used that proceed to move to the US.
So you
Yeah.
kind of
So
got
yeah,
you got
actually instilled. And my grandfather, also an entrepreneur, he supposedly took, this is the family, history, or I don't know, myth. he got somehow a radio, converted that to a bicycle, converted that to a taxi, converted that to a movie theater, converted that to a steel factory. And so that's kind of where my family has like some weird legacy or myth around like entrepreneurship.
Now, did your parents, when you were growing up, did they, I don't know, did they either formally or informally try to instill in you like, hey, set up the lemonade stand on the
Oh yeah.
out? Really?
Yeah, but they also had me working in every one of their businesses. Like my mom took a dry cleaner to a clothing factory and so on. So I was always working there, you know. And if I wasn't working there, then I'm pulling weeds outside or doing something. So I started working when I was 13, and because I don't know, it was just something that had to be not done because we didn't need the money, my income or anything like that, but it was just kind of given that you would work. Like either you're going to work for me or you're going to work somewhere, right? So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And what were the family businesses?
So like I said, dry cleaning to a clothing factory, like a garment factory, manufacturing.
Okay,
And so that was kind of primarily what they did. And then they retired after they sold that clothing factory.
okay. Any big lessons there? I mean, obviously you learned.
Oh, like there was definitely big lessons when NAFTA happened, that there's just certain things that you have to actually keep an eye out for from a political, economic, industry-wide shift. Because my parents being immigrants, they were not keeping on top of politics. And NAFTA being the free trade agreement killed the garment industries within the US because everything moved to Mexico, right? Or China or out of the country because it was just much cheaper to manufacture clothes outside the country. And I think that's one of the things that I learned is like you kind of have to watch where industry's heading, where even political climates are heading, where technology is heading, and obviously what user wants, right? What people want, and really understanding the demand side of it as well. So watching my parents, obviously grow a business, become successful, take the risk to take the investment from that business, the proceeds, and try to create something bigger, like a clothing factory from dry cleaning, but then having that somewhat be depressed by something that was completely out of their control, right? However, if they had really understood the climate, could they have sold that business earlier, right, and made off better? Things of that nature.
Yeah, yeah. So, jumping forward a little bit, as you moved forward and you decided to, when you moved off into college, you decided to study anthropology and electronic arts.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about, your sort of your decision to do that and what was involved there?
I think it was partly my rebellious nature. Having Asian parents, Korean parents, they either want you to be a doctor, a lawyer, or something like an MBA. And I decided to declare art as a major. And my mom and I had a huge fight about this. But I was really lucky that I was attending UC Santa Barbara at the time, undergrad there, and the dean of the art school was hugely into mixed media art and had gotten a huge grant. We had large computer labs, and I learned to code during art school. And we created amazing art installations, again, that were digital, like robotics, animation, you name it, right? And we had these huge computers that were SIGGRAPH at the time, top of the line. And at the time, UC Santa Barbara, along with Harvard and a few other schools, were one of the early adopters of the internet. So in senior year, I actually started a web development company because I could code there. And then luckily for me, being at the right place at the right time, I graduated. My boyfriend, now husband at the time, lived in the Bay Area. We decided to move up to the Bay Area where the internet was booming, was starting to boom, and I was one of the few people who could code front end web and got into e-commerce. Built the first e-commerce sites for like Hewlett Packard, GM, you name it. So it was in some ways fortuitous, but it was in some ways I just loved, even early on, like I said, living in an environment in my family that loved technology, got into art, but then got into technology inadvertently through art and graduated from school, ended up in Silicon Valley during the 90s and started programming the first websites for major companies. So that's kind of how my journey started. But at the same time, I was there during the dot-com bust of 2000 as well. And I was, oh my God, I was in one of the biggest companies that had gotten so much funding as an internet company. And we had nothing to do as the dot-com was just, plummeting. We were sitting around tables, like making Turkish coffee, reading fortunes off of Turkish coffee. I don't know if you guys ever did this, where you flip a cup over and you read the Turkish coffee grinds. And so it was just like we had nothing to do, and they weren't firing us. We're like, well, we'll just stick around as long as we can. But then I started looking around, going, what's next? What's going to be the cool thing next? And at that time, smartphones were starting to come out, like really not well done. But I thought Palm would be the next big place to be. Little did I know Apple was going to actually beat that. It took 7 years, but I joined Palm around 2000, right after the dot-com bust happened. I was there for a good 4 years or so, and when moved out to Qualcomm, and then after that, a company called AppMobile, which was really interesting, but down in LA, first video phone company. But that didn't go over. So I started my own company, did something called, at the time, human factors engineering, now known as mobile user experience. And when I started my first company in January of 2007, I was like, hey, I'm going to try this. I know enough people in the industry. Let's try it. What happened was Apple came out the same year, 6 months after I launched my company, and everybody's like, what is this mobile user experience? What is this thing? And I'm like, hey, I do it. I can do that. And my company did actually take off until the Great Recession happened. And it was a very interesting time when the Great Recession happened, like, because you still had the climb of mobile, but the gas pedal was being like let go a bit because of the Great Recession. But still, we managed to weather it. I managed to have all of my staff stay with me. Didn't pay them for a good 6 months or so. I'm like, hopefully nobody from the IRS is hearing this. They went on unemployment while still working for me. I'm like, can you just go collect unemployment? Because I can't pay you, but the money will come in eventually. And eventually I'll pay you, but keep working. And we were all having so much fun, right? Because we were working on some really cool projects around user experience for Apple. Android started coming out, Windows CE back then. And we were also young at that time. And so we wrote it out. And that's the company that ended up selling to Ernst & Young eventually later down the road. But you weather storms.
Yeah, I say there's so much to unpack there. So, when you're describing this, it feels like all the dots connect like naturally. Like, why wouldn't they? But like when you're in the moment, I mean, the decision to go study like art, electronic arts, and anthropology. I mean, I assume that decision came from you. At your mom's sort of hesitance, right? Like she didn't want you to do that, but somehow you felt like this is what you wanted to do. Is that right?
Yeah, it is.
And so you kind of trusted in what you saw, what your passions were, despite maybe some your mom. I would imagine she's very influential on you, but despite what she was saying. By the way, why did she not want you to study art? Was it more of a practical thing?
Well, it was that whole guilt trip. I moved to the U.S. and changed my whole life and blah, 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 risked everything for you guys to have a better life, and you're going to study art and starve. And, she thought I was throwing it all away. Everything that she tried to give me, I guess,
She thought you wouldn't be able to make a living with that degree. Okay.
Right. And she had very little. And I think this is true for probably most parents, right? They have very little concept of all the possibilities and of how you can actually generate wealth, right? Or have a steady living. They didn't factor my happiness into it. They're like, we don't care if you're happy as long as you can feed yourself, right? Uh, but I'm like, well, no, this does make me happy. And anthropology was really fascinating at the time because it was physical anthropology. And I think that's where that really did lead to like user experience, right? Learning about user experience and such. But I naturally kind of gravitated towards it because it was fun.
Yeah, I mean, you followed it because of your passion. You followed it because you were excited and interested in it. You didn't follow. I wouldn't imagine, or you tell me, but you didn't follow it because you thought there would be this master plan where everything connected and
Yeah.
you'd be able to make a good living out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Right.
it
And
was
so,
really fun. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to be said there about following something that you're excited about, that you're passionate about. And it seems like that's been sort of a foundation for how you've made your decisions. Is that fair?
Oh, yeah, it's totally fair because when I went from that first company where I actually had some background in it, I had connections, right, and started a mobile user experience company because I had already been doing mobile for 7 years prior. After I sold them, or even before I sold them, I'm like, what am I going to do next? Like, oh, this IoT thing is fascinating. Like, there's so much stuff happening in IoT. And for some reason, I decided to go into real estate with IoT because IOTAS serviced apartments, right? And the apartment industry is $3 trillion industry. I didn't know this when I got into it, but knew nobody in that industry, knew nothing about real estate, knew nothing really about IoT or hardware development, truthfully, and decided that I was going to try it out, right? I mean, I knew enough about hardware from my mobile background, but knew nothing about real estate and how the real estate industry looked at their bottom line, right? Fundamentally, that is a financial asset class, and they really look at their bottom line. And just kind of jumped into it, not knowing too much about where that industry was heading. And as I was building that company, doing all that discovery and research around it, and I think it's, again, kind of partly led by this sounds fun and exciting. IoT, I think, is going to be the next thing. Let's see where it all leads, right? And where can it be best applied? Real estate in large, apartment communities, like that's fast adoption. And so kind of just jumped in. And I think you'll find this with most entrepreneurs or people who start businesses. They don't really think about consequences or plan that much. They're like, this seems like something that could take over the world, right? Without thinking through like, hey, how is this really going to impact my day to day?
And say, how long did it take you to build IOTAS? And then at what year did you sell it?
So truly started 2016. And then we sold in 2022. So 6 years journey. I would say we got our first seed round a year after. So 2017, Intel came in along with Oregon Venture Fund and a few other seed funds. And then after that, Liberty Global and Telus Ventures. And so some large corporate institutionals that had real estate under ownership or had telco under ownership. And so that was 2019. So for our Series A, so about 3 years after we started. But we were lucky in the sense that we had a customer that approached us, right? Or approached me and said, hey, I want a technology differentiation for my building. It's a 200-unit apartment building with retail on the bottom. And they understood, like real estate folks, we understood that, hey, I'm not even building this building for millennials. Like this is for whatever comes after, right? All these, young people have technology in their pockets, but they don't have it where they live. So he's like, show me what you can do. So I was lucky. I got a playground, right? I had said, okay, I'll take 100 apartment units and we'll do A/B testing, 100 smart apartment units, 100 dumb apartment units, and let's see which ones rent out fastest. And that's how IOTAS came to be. It was really, it was almost a technical challenge, but at the same time, I'd already started looking at connected car, connected home, connected health, connected finance, and from my first company. So we had already started delving into those areas. And this was where I was like, this is a really interesting area. Real estate could be huge. I know no one in it except for this one individual, but let's take it on a roadshow I went on and talked at a bunch of conferences to gauge interest, and there was a lot of interest. So it was a fairly quick journey, actually, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like, you took a lot of risks, and using your passion, just kind of figuring out, here's some industry trends. This might work. This might not work. You really kind of dived into it. And I think it kind of relates to, job seekers. I mean, sometimes, you don't know what's on the other side. And a lot of people, when they're going through job seeking, they're thinking it's always greener on the other side. But in this reality, it sounds like you were just kind of taking a risk. And when job seekers are looking, they're basically taking a risk. They're taking a risk in finding their next opportunity, joining another company. And so it just sounds like there's some similarities there.
Oh, most definitely. Yeah.
There's always the thing you mentioned a minute ago too, say, is that a lot of times, maybe even speaking for yourself, but when you go into thinking about starting something new, you don't know all the consequences. You might not have a full-on plan. And maybe it's better that way, because if you know all the consequences, you might not take that journey, right? And you also mentioned that you say that you were lucky. I kind of believe in luck, but I kind of don't, because I feel like you've put yourself in the right position at the right time, such that when you saw an opportunity, you were able to mobilize around it. Some folks, they're not able to do that, or they choose not to do that, or they don't position themselves to be lucky. They don't increase the probability of their ability to be lucky. Like, what are some of the things that you've done that have increased the probability that you would be lucky? You would find yourself in the right place in the right time, and once you've identified the right opportunity, you would be able to move on it. What are some of those things that you've done?
Being open. I think being open and connected. So again, that IOTAS came about because I was well connected within my local community, right? I was known as an entrepreneur or a business leader within the community. So I had pretty active participation in my local community, working with other business community members, right? And not saying no to the real estate developer that approached me and said, hey, can you work on this? Which is totally antithetical to what we were doing, because we were at the time working with like Samsung, Verizon, like telcos and phone manufacturers and automotive manufacturers, and a real estate person coming and approaching us was just random, and it wasn't like he was going to pay me for any of it, and it was just like a prototype, and it was kind of like our own investment. And I think really, yeah, I agree with you, Eric, that there is some level of you make your own luck, right? And I think you make your own luck by not shooting everything that comes at you down, which I've seen a lot of people do. Like, a lot of people will dismiss opportunities because it sounds crazy, right? But sometimes the craziest opportunity that people bring to you are the most interesting and may have the most legs, right? And this is in some ways how I think about like startup as an investor, when I evaluate startups. Like, some of the craziest ideas led by the right people have so much leg and so much room to grow. And so I really think it's being open and being well connected.
There's a quote, and I forget, I'll butcher it, but people often dismiss something to the effect of, people often dismissed opportunity because it looks like a pair of overalls and it's hard work, something like that, right?
That too.
And
yeah.
And people shy away from it because it's either unknown or it's too much work. But being open, so that sort of allowed you to kind of find the next thing and kind of move on it, it sounds like.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And again, I think that has to do with like not being risk averse, right? Just being open to potentially seeing anything and everything, and seeing change and being able to deal with change.
Yeah. Talk to us a little bit about, you mentioned in our previous conversation that there were some different ways that you were approaching your first company versus your second company, right? And would love to hear a little bit more about that, because it felt like there was sort of some transformation within yourself, and sort of some realization, some transformation within yourself that led to an evolution in your leadership and how you approach in your outlook. So we'd love to hear a little bit more about that, Sce.
Yeah. So I think when I started my first company, I was coming out of really like Silicon Valley, during the internet boom. And, I hate to use this phrase, but it was very much a male dominated culture with leadership that was very male dominated. People like Steve Jobs still worshipped, right? And he did a lot of really great things. And I think coming out of that, I emulated a lot of the things that I saw, right? So, I know this is going to be in the public, but like one of my first bosses in Silicon Valley bought me a lap dance, right? And I was like, I guess I'm okay with this. This is how things are done. Business is done this way, kind of thing, right? And you hear about the Me Too movement now, and that would just never happen, right? But this was the 90s. Like anything went. It was, wild, wild west. And I mean, even now, like after FTX and hearing about whatever that happened in the Bahamas, it sounds kind of crazy too. But like I had come out of this really male-dominated culture with male-dominated leadership executives. I think I had one female boss in like, I don't know, 10 years or so, right? And so I led and found partners in my first company who were male. I had male partners, and I partly got the male partners in some ways to propagate some of that, right? And I have regrets about that. Propagate some of the male-dominated culture and to entertain some of our clients the way that I thought things should be done, right? And I think when I transitioned to my second company, I had some amazing mentors, both male and female. Are like, no, that's not how leadership should be. That's not how your executive team should be run. This is not a good corporate culture. Like if you want to actually grow a company and have great people working for you and staying, like think about it differently. Think about how you would lead from your own true nature, right? And so because of some of those mentorship, I realized that as a woman, as a minority woman, like the way I wanted to lead was not how I led the first company, right? I had led the first company believing after reading The Art of War, like, Prince Machiavelli, like things that we studied when we were coming up back in the 90s as a leader, like very like, I don't know how to put it, like, yeah, Art of War, Sun Tzu, to now like The Five Dysfunctions of a Team, right, by Patrick Lencioni. And I think that's where this huge transition happened of like, I can lead like a woman. And by the way, one of my engineers recently said that to me when I departed with ADT, that they were going to miss me. And one of my female engineers, Russian, kind of had broken English. And when she said, hey, I love, I'm going to miss you because you led like a woman. I'm like, what do you mean by that? Should I be taking offense that you are telling me that I led like a woman? And then I had to catch myself. I'm like, why am I taking offense that she said that? And what she meant was she never had a male boss. I mean, a female boss. She only had male leaders in a tech role. And she's like, you took care of us. You made sure that we were okay. You were so, and she used this word, motherly, about how you made sure that we got what we needed, and you were very supportive. And I was like, this is why that company felt so much better, right? Because I did lead true to how I believed I should lead versus how I was taught and grew up in this kind of toxic culture. And so that huge like light bulb change made, in some ways IOTAS exit so much better, right? And that how we grew so much faster and so much more culturally like binding, right? And I think that also helped with who I hired as well, who I had around myself in the board. And our cultural practice was that we would always hire honest people who are honest with themselves, especially the executive leaders, knew their strengths and weaknesses, and to instill trust within the team. And so that we could communicate and have really hard conversations. Because when you have trust, you can have like some really shitty, like you're doing a shitty job conversation and still get a beer afterwards, right? Because you were well-intentioned and they could tell me I'm doing a shitty job too and could still get a beer afterwards. And then align faster and win, right? So that's where this whole principle of leading in some ways true to your kind of own cultural values, which hopefully starts with honesty, allows you to win and win faster.
Yeah, it's amazing to hear the story and just how you've evolved and maybe moved to. It sounds like you moved to a place where you're leading more authentically, right?
Mm-hmm.
And not trying to emulate, obviously, some of the things that you've seen work in other cases, but you led more authentically from within. And can you talk a little bit more about hiring? Again, a lot of folks out there are in sort of the job search mode, and so maybe you could shed some light on what is the psychology of a hiring manager, right? Especially someone that has a focused intent on building, a cohesive culture. So part of what we do is interviewing for technical and skills, but a lot of the interviewing that we do is we're interviewing for cultural fit.
Mm-hmm.
And so what should a job seeker out there know about trying to find the right fit? And then for people that are trying to build teams, how should they be thinking about hiring to to further culture fit, and not even just fit, but even taking their culture to the next level, right? How do you think about all of that?
Yeah, it's so funny. You bring up skills and cultural fit, and everybody's like, what does cultural fit mean, right? Skills is very obvious. It's a checkbox, right? You're checking box. We never hired for skills. You can always teach a skill. You can't teach honesty. I mean, that is something that you can teach. I'm sorry. You can teach honesty and ethics, but boy, does it take a long time, right? And so when you think about cultural fit, how do you get cultural fit, right? And so we would look for candidates who had some level of vulnerability and were able to not point out necessarily their weakness, but own up to their weaknesses, be accountable, right, for things that went wrong in a previous position, and be able to speak to what went wrong in a previous position and why what was their part in that responsibility, right? So if we see a candidate that was that's the perfect skill set of everything we might want and checks all the boxes, we would still take the candidate that can actually speak to some of the challenges in a vulnerable and honest way and communicate and own up to their own failures versus the person with the perfect skill set, right? Because you can't teach somebody to be accountable and communicate that in a responsible manner. You can teach them how to, develop Gen AI skills or whatever, right? Or DevOps skills, right? You can teach that. But you can't teach somebody who's not checking in code and not responsible and not being able to talk about why they can't check in code, right?
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that we would always err on. And we don't catch it every time, but this is where I think cultural fit, every company is going to have a different cultural fit. But if you can have that level of honest communication, you will find the cultural fit that works for you within that, within your own framework. So I think candidates are often so nervous about whether they check the boxes that they forget that the employer or the hiring manager may not be looking to check boxes, but maybe looking at ways that you can develop, see the potential in somebody and develop them to be a really great engineer, product manager, or user experience manager, whatever it is, right? If I'm hiring executives, they better already have that. I do not have time to teach honesty. I do not have time to teach ethics. Because good management has to come from the top, and I really relied on my executive team to be able to manage their people and hire people under them who instilled similar beliefs and hired, in some ways, the product managers and the engineers who actually could prop the whole thing up.
Say, when you think about some of the trends that you're seeing nowadays, how is that translating to how executives should be thinking about building out their leadership team? With potentially new emerging roles, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, it's so fascinating. Whenever like new shifts happen in the industry, especially in the tech industry. So when social media happened, you had to have like a privacy officer, right, or a security officer. Now with like Gen AI or AI coming around, I think you're going to have a really strong policy, like legal counsel has always been kind of very important role, right? But it's almost like now, and I shouldn't say legal, it doesn't have to be necessarily legal, but somebody who really understands the ramification and the ethics. And it's almost like maybe you want somebody who's an anthropologist, a chief anthropologist officer, or whatever it is, right? That can say, hey, are we developing AI in the right way for humanity, right? And so I think when I saw the shift when cloud happened from system architect or network engineers to DevOps, right? And this huge change into DevOps with microservices. Now I think you're going to have something, and that was very technical. It was a huge shift to a very technical world when cloud happened. Now I think with AI, you're going to kind of see need for experts in kind of human and humanity and conditions around humanity, and what is acceptable and what's not, and what will be the tipping point of like when AI takes over certain aspects. And so, some of the stuff that's happening right now, I think is really fascinating. But at the same time, it will require some like a step back to look at where we are as humanity overall, right? And it will take a different skill set that is not as technical as a DevOps engineer or manager.
Yeah, things are moving so fast nowadays, and it's I mean, the technology it's almost not, how can we build it or if we can build it, but maybe should we build it?
Mm-hmm.
And is it going to be a net negative to humanity, to society, to our customers, to our company, and yeah. So
Yeah, maybe it's a philosophy or ethics professor that you need to have on your team, So.
right.
And I was going to ask, is there any suggestions that you would have for just job seekers, utilizing AI or what to watch for? Because you're talking about technical trends. And, I think you're right. Like there's all these technical trends that come through with whether it's mobile or cloud, and AI is the next thing. So, what would you say, or any suggestions that you would say, give for those job seekers, considering what AI is doing now?
I mean, if you are not taking courses in Gen AI, I would definitely recommend taking some courses in Gen AI, but also taking some maybe courses in ethics around that too, right? To be able to speak intelligently to like the question Eric asked, like, should we, right? And we were so bad. Humans are so bad at the should we question. And as an entrepreneur, that's one of the things I never asked myself, right? Now, with a little bit more time and experience under my belt, I'm like, yeah, no, I think we're at this like chasm, not chasm, but like threshold of like asking really like, should we? Like we built a huge system around us, and I do see like convergence between quantum computing and AI, right? And you have those two convergences happen. I'm a little scared, to be honest.
Yeah, it's crazy because there's this attitude too, because even if you feel like your company should take a different route and they should not do something, there's this thought that, well, if I don't do it, somebody else is going to do it, and they're going to do it anyway, and and it becomes one of those situations. And so I don't know. I think maybe there needs to be some sort of overarching regulatory structure that needs to be put into place for some of these technologies, and but who knows?
I don't think regulation is going to move fast enough, to be honest. Like that's one of the things I saw with the right to be forgotten law with social media and such, what Europe did, and they really gave all the jurisdictional power to the companies in some ways. Like when the right to be forgotten law passed, it's like if you, Eric, said, hey, I don't want this up on the internet, you would have to, if you're European, go to the European jurisdiction around that. But then that legal body would be like, pass it to Google and be like, Google, should we take this down or should we not? And so Google had the power around that, right? As an example. And so I don't know if jurisdiction will move fast enough. I really am curious how this is all going. I don't disagree that it should happen, but technology is moving so much faster.
Might not be enough. Yeah. Well, Sce, I know we're bumping up against time here. We got to close up. I really appreciate. It feels like even in the time we chatted here that we've gotten to know more about you, but like we're just still scratching the surface. But thank you for sharing your story. Is there any? What's the best way for the audience to connect with you?
Best way for me would be, find me on LinkedIn, send me a message. I'm always happy to read messages, especially if there's something really interesting going on. I do look at it maybe every 3 days or so. Right now, I'm kind of on a sabbatical till February. But yes, I'm looking at various things right now. And so there's a lot of interesting things happening. So I'm always happy to connect. Like I said, always open to opportunity. And that is usually through connections.
Awesome. Any parting words for our audience?
I would say, besides Gen AI, check out the space industry and what the space industry is up to. I think that's really, really fascinating as well. And I think on top of that, quantum computing. There's some really interesting things happening there that people are ignoring. And so if there's, how do I put it? If there's 100 people applying to an AI company, there's probably still a lot of companies applying to space industries, but there's a lot of adjacent companies that are being formed, created, but I think we'll be on a very fast trajectory of growth. And definitely always be looking up at JumpSearch. Listen to the podcast, folks, hopefully, and hopefully we'll watch this as well. And so thank you guys for having me.
Yeah,
Awesome,
thank you for
Sce.
joining us, especially during your sabbatical.
That's when I have time.
I didn't realize that. So appreciate your time.
And thanks for the shout out, Sce. I really appreciate it. This will be published on Spotify over the next few days. And to our audience out there, have a great holiday. And thank you, Sce. And we will talk to you all soon.
Thank you. Bye.